Who benefits from the fact that 7 billion people stay silent, eat what they're given, and only think what they're allowed to think? And most importantly, what will happen next if no one dares to raise their head? Hello everyone. If you're watching this channel right now, it means you're not one of those who are satisfied with the morning news on TV. Because those who get their information only from official media live in a very convenient picture of the world. Wars happen because of territories, conflicts because of resources. And the leaders of countries are random people whom the people have chosen from millions of candidates. It's beautiful, logical, and absolutely does not correspond to reality. There is one foolproof technique that is used every time an inconvenient question is asked too loudly and too precisely. Not a rebuttal, not an argument, not an analysis of the facts on their merits. Just two words: conspiracy theory. That's it. The conversation is over. The person who just asked the question is automatically moved into the category of lunatics, paranoids, and people who, apparently, skipped classes at school. Convenient, isn't it? Extremely. Especially if you have nothing substantive to answer with. Listen to how this sounds in a live performance. Researchers have noted that the shadow cast by the moon during a solar eclipse has a diameter dozens of times smaller than it should be according to standard astronomical calculations. This observation has been recorded and is reproducible. Anyone with access to eclipse photographs and a calculator can verify it. What happens in response? Laughter, sarcasm. Oh, you're just paranoid, go do something useful. No analysis, no figures to refute it. Just ridicule. Quick, loud, and aimed not at the argument, but at the person. Or here's another example. People have noticed that almost all photographs of outer space taken aboard orbital stations and during spacewalks are shot with fisheye lenses. These are wide-angle lenses with characteristic optical distortion. They round off the horizon line, make straight lines appear convex, and create a specific visual distortion of everything that gets into the frame. The question is logical: why is this particular lens used in situations where facts of fundamental scientific and historical importance are being documented? The answer from official sources is silence. But in the comments there's a chorus. Did you even go to school? It's just a wide field of view, necessary for shooting in confined spaces. Maybe so, but then explain it calmly and to the point. Without laughter, without condescension. Just answer the question, why does no one actually do it this way? This relates to a persistent system of suppressing inconvenient observations through social pressure, not through logic. The mechanism has been honed to the point of automatism. A person asks a question, and they are publicly ridiculed. Just a few such episodes are enough, and most people fall silent forever. Not because they are convinced they are wrong, but because the price of public ridicule is too high. No one wants to be that person who gets laughed at in the comments. This works more effectively than any censorship, because censorship is visible while social pressure feels like your own decision to stay silent. Now, the third example, the simplest and most telling one. People asked, why in the midst of an economic crisis does the government allocate funds first to large corporations and banks rather than to low-income citizens? The question is arithmetic. The figures are public and the aid packages are documented. In 2008, the American government allocated about $700 billion to save the banks. And that's just the official part that went through Congress. In 2020, corporate subsidies as part of pandemic relief packages worldwide amounted to trillions. At the same time, ordinary citizens received one-time payments that weren't even enough to cover a month's rent. Ask this question out loud, and you'll immediately be told that you simply don't understand economics. That banks are systemically important institutions, and if they collapse, everyone will suffer. And as a final argument, they ordered vaccines for us, and yet you're still not satisfied. This relates to what sociologists call the reverse Overton window, a situation where common sense is declared marginal, and the official version is defended not with arguments, but with social sanctions. Normality and abnormality switch places, but not through discussion, rather through pressure, through ridicule, through labeling, through a condescending tone that says, "You don't deserve a serious answer because the very question is not serious." The most curious thing about all this is the following. The people who shout conspiracy theory the loudest are usually those who have never checked any of the disputed facts themselves. They haven't looked at the original sources, they haven't done the math, they haven't compared different versions. They simply repeat the reaction they've learned to consider socially acceptable. It's safe to laugh at conspiracy theorists, it's socially approved, and it doesn't require any intellectual effort. Asking uncomfortable questions is risky, socially stigmatized, and requires the willingness to withstand pressure. And here a truly important question arises. If a version is so absurd that it doesn't deserve a serious response, then why isn't it refuted seriously? Why is it that instead of analyzing the facts, there is always ridicule? Because ridicule shuts down the conversation, while analyzing the facts opens it up. And not always in the direction that those who are laughing would like. Those who do not adhere to accepted norms will be subjected to insults and ridicule. This is not an accident and not a manifestation of human nature. It's a tool, refined, tested, and effective precisely because most people never dare to ask, why in fact is laughter considered an answer? The world is ruled by a single family. This is not a metaphor or an artistic exaggeration. It's a working construct that functions regardless of whether we know about it or not. But every control system has its limits, and so does this one. There is one variable that no financial instruments, no laws, and no information filters can bring fully under control. That variable is birth rate. People reproduce quickly everywhere and completely independently of whether it is convenient for anyone or not. 7 billion people on the planet. And every year, that number grows. The more people there are, the harder they are to control. This is simple math that any administrator understands, not to mention those who have been building their system for centuries. What does a sensible manager do when the herd becomes too large to control by force? He changes the tool. Instead of a whip, feed; instead of prohibition, dependency; instead of prison, voluntary numbness. This is exactly what has been happening with the planet's food system over the past 7 decades. Food is getting cheaper. This is presented as an achievement of civilization, as a victory over hunger, as a triumph of technology. But take a closer look at what this cheapness is actually made of. Trans fats, sugar substitutes with neurotoxic profiles, flavor enhancers that block satiety signals, preservatives with documented effects on hormonal balance. None of this is an accidental byproduct of production. All of these are technological solutions that make products cheaper to produce, while simultaneously creating a persistent chemical dependency in the consumer. This applies to specific substances that have undergone independent studies. Monosodium glutamate, in high concentrations, disrupts the functioning of the hypothalamus, the part of the brain responsible for regulating appetite and a whole range of behavioral responses. High fructose corn syrup, which has replaced regular sugar in Western food production, is metabolized differently and leads to insulin resistance much more quickly. Artificial azeo dyes, which are banned in several European countries, are still freely used in children's food products in other jurisdictions. All of this is not secret information. These are open scientific publications that simply don't make it into the evening news because the evening news is funded by the same corporations that produce these products. A poisoned body is a controllable body, but the system goes further because the body can be restored. Consciousness is much more complex. That is why, alongside the degradation of nutrition, there is also a degradation of the information environment. Content is getting shorter. Attention is becoming fragmented. The ability to concentrate for extended periods in people who grew up with social networks is clinically measurably lower than in previous generations. It's not just the times we live in. This is the result of deliberate platform design with dopamine addiction mechanisms built in that are absolutely identical to those used in slot machines. Variable reinforcement, unpredictable rewards, endless scrolling with no exit point. A casino in your pocket that operates around the clock and for free. This also applies to those who, in this environment, try to create something different, giving people tools for independent thinking, for understanding how the world works beyond the official narrative. In Russia, a law on educational activities was passed in 2021. The wording sounds neutral. The essence does not. In reality, the law introduced a permit system for any educational activity outside officially accredited institutions. Want to give lectures? You need approval. Want to teach people something that isn't part of the approved programs? You need permission. Want to share knowledge publicly without being part of the system? First, prove that you have the right to do so, according to the very system whose knowledge you intend to disseminate. Self-education turns into a suspicious activity. An independent researcher becomes a potential violator, a person who reads original sources instead of retellings, who compares different versions instead of accepting the official one, who asks questions instead of just nodding along. This person falls out of the controlled loop, and falling out of the controlled loop is a threat. Not to society, but to the system. Look at how the chain is built. Cheap food lowers cognitive resources. Algorithmic platforms fragment attention. Entertainment content fills the space that becomes available. The law restricts access to independent education. At each level, a person receives slightly fewer opportunities for independent thinking than at the previous one. This is not paranoia, it is a systemic design that can be described, measured, and documented at every level. If someone decides to break this chain and tell people how it works, the system is already prepared. Pocket laws, licensing requirements, foreign agent statuses, platform restrictions, tax inspections. There are enough tools to silence any voice that becomes loud enough. And all of this happens within the framework of the law, formally legal. In essence, it is the suppression of any attempt to go beyond the boundaries of permitted knowledge. That's how things are. Not an exclamation, not a call to action, just a statement, calm like a weather report. Because it is precisely this calmness that is the most frightening thing of all. It's not that the system exists, but that most people have long since gotten used to it and have stopped noticing where their own will ends and someone else's script begins. If you've watched up to this point, it means you're not one of those who accept ready-made answers. It means you're one of those who think. There are fewer and fewer such people with each passing year. If what was said here resonates with something you've long felt but couldn't put into words, hit the like button. Not for the sake of the numbers, but because the algorithm works against content like this by default. Every like is a small counterweight to the system we've just taken apart piece by piece. Subscribe to the channel if you want to keep receiving what they don't show on the evening news, and click the bell because without it, the platform simply won't show you the next episode. It won't ask, it won't warn you, it just won't show it. You already know how this works.